killed than in previous days. The main reason why the two sides are so deadlocked is because neither is particularly strong. But all the same, it's hardly surprising the words civil war are beginning to appear more frequently to describe what's happening in Libya. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Mohammed is a resident of AlJazeera, which has been the scene of some of the fiercest fighting on Saturday. And he spoke to us a little earlier on.
Early morning, following the Fajr, early morning prayers, the city was raided by pro-Gaddafi forces. They started randomly shooting and firing at the youth. Many fell dead in dozens. We did not leave the square since morning. Many were killed, dozens were killed, and we managed to push them back. Following the noon, the AlJazeera came under another fresh attack. And the problem now, they are dressed as civilians and shooting the people, and we cannot separate those who are with us and who is against us. The entire city is under fierce attack.
Well, Tony Bertley joins me live from Benghazi in eastern Libya, which is in the hands of the protesters, as we've been saying. Tony, we saw pictures earlier on there of the funerals that were taking place after the ammunition depot exploded. What is the mood of people there as they continue to remain in control of Benghazi?
Well, they're very resilient, I have to say. This resilience is growing by the day, even though, events around them are changing. They're very strongly of the opinion that they perhaps will have to rectify this whole scenario themselves, because originally they were hoping that in the beginning that Gaddafi would step down, then they were hoping the international community would push them out. The pendulum has swung back, so I think they think now that they have to take matters in their own hands, and I think you're seeing this on the streets now, and you're seeing this also in the advance of their forces. And you were mentioning about Ras Lanuf. Well, we are told that they've gone beyond that now. They've gone to a place called Bin Yawad, which is about 30 kilometers further west towards Sirte. That's the Gaddafi stronghold. So they are moving ahead. What they're going to achieve, I don't know. They haven't encountered tough resistance. We understand only about 8 casualties in that fighting, but it shows a resolve here.
What about communications? Do they know what's going on in AlJazeera? Are they in touch with protesters over there and elsewhere in the country?
Very scant. It's very difficult because you get very poor telephone communications. One day you can get a connection, the next day you can't. We're told they have connections to people in that area, not the town itself, but the people in the area have connections to the town. So information is coming out. They say it's fairly reliable, but you do get this kind of problem that you don't know 100% of the information you're getting is accurate. So there are lots of speculation, lots of rumours, and it's sometimes hard to get a true handle on what's going on.
OK, Tony, thanks very much indeed for that. Tony Bertley in Benghazi there. Now, Saudi Arabia has banned all demonstrations after a series of minor protests in the oil-producing eastern province. Mainly Shia protesters gathered in the towns of Qatif and Hafuf on Thursday and Friday. They've been demanding the release of all prisoners being held without trial, as well as better access to jobs. Authorities say the security forces will stop at nothing to quell the unrest. After days of violent unrest, Oman's Sultan Qaboos has replaced 2 of his cabinet ministers, that's according to state media. Protesters there have been calling for more jobs and better political representation. Meanwhile, workers have been staging a sit-in at the main oil field in Hama to demand more state investment. It's been more than 3 weeks since the Egyptian uprising that toppled Hosni Mubarak, but still the turmoil continues. In Cairo, we're getting reports that the state security offices have been torched. Police say protesters started the fire, but witnesses claim officers inside the building had been burning documents linked to human rights abuses under Hosni Mubarak. Meanwhile, protesters have occupied the state security offices in Alexandria. Dozens of people were injured after police fired on the demonstrators as they stormed the building late on Friday. Again, there were claims that officers there had been destroying evidence of abuse. And protesters also gathered outside the court in Cairo, where Egypt's former interior minister has been standing trial. Habib El Adly pleaded not guilty to charges of money laundering and profiteering. Now, he's also been widely blamed for the brutal crackdown on protesters last month. The trial is set to continue in April. Well, let's talk more about the situation in Egypt. Let's speak to Sama Shahata. He's a professor of Arab politics at Georgetown University in Cairo. Good to have you with us. First of all, the trial of Habib El Adly. He's facing charges of money laundering. A lot of protesters think that he should be on trial for ordering the violent crackdown against protesters. What do you think?
Yes, well, certainly those charges will also be placed in front of him. And those are the most serious charges, not only in terms of the deaths of protesters between January 25th until the end of the revolution, but even crimes that were committed on his watch, as it were, by the Interior Ministry, by the police, by the Central Security Forces, and by the state security forces in his long reign. So the first case today, at least, was about financial issues. But I think cases regarding violence and death and so on are soon to come in the future.
We've seen a lot of protesters surrounding security officials' headquarters today. Obviously, a lot of anger at the way the security forces have operated in the past. Do you think we could see the possibility that the security apparatus be dismantled as protesters want?
Well, of course, there's no question that every state needs a police force, and Egypt needs one in the future as well. However, this was an authoritarian state under Mr. Mubarak, and the Interior Ministry not only had ordinary police, but they had hundreds of thousands of people in the Central Security Forces, which was a very repressive apparatus used against domestic protesters and for regime security. There was also state security, and this is what the burning and the conflicts that occurred over the last couple of days had to do, also a repressive apparatus of the regime. And there have been many people who have called for the dissolving of the state security because it has no place in a democratic state. So certainly there's going to need to be some police and some security, but the most repressive elements that were the hallmark of the Mubarak regime, I think, need to be dissolved.
You spoke there about the burning. Some speculation that these security forces are now getting rid of evidence which might come back to haunt them. Is there a mechanism by which they can be investigated or prosecuted?
Yes, potentially, theoretically, and hopefully they will. And of course, not only in Cairo, and also, as the report mentioned, in Alexandria, there were reports that documents were being shredded and burned, possibly having to do with the crimes that were committed, the violence and the deaths, the hundreds of deaths during the revolution. There does need to be general accountability, and this has been one of the demands of the revolution, that not only the political figures and so on be held accountable, but people in the Interior Ministry, especially those in charge of state security and the Central Security Forces, be held accountable. And I believe that there will be some mechanisms for accountability in the coming weeks and months.
And do you think we'll see emergency law lifted soon? Because that is one of the key demands of the protesters, which hasn't been done yet.
Yes, you're right, and it's been a demand for quite some time because emergency law has been in effect since